for being here. I am Kelli Rodriguez-Currie, and I'm the director of our Master of Legal Studies and Sports Law program here at Seattle University School of Law. I've been here for, like a year and a half, but I've been on campus for several years. I'm a graduate of Seattle University School of Law and earned my JD and my master's in sports administration and leadership. I've been teaching kind of as an adjunct and part-time, and then eventually full-time faculty here off and on for the last 10 years now. And I've been on staff here at the law school for the last little bit. So I'm super excited to introduce a professor on faculty with us, Professor Mark Chinen, and would love for you to have the opportunity to introduce yourself.
Well, thanks very much, Kelly, appreciate it. And hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm sorry to have been a little late, the mix-up in terms of which platform to use for the meeting. Just as you can see on the slide, on the slides here, I was educated at Harvard Law School, and I had a seminary background before I went to law school. Raised in Hawaii, and actually I'm here in Hawaii on this meeting, taking care of some family here for the summertime. My particular interests are international business transactions and international law. Actually, anything to do with international economic law and international activities. And then more recently, about say 5 or 6 years ago, I became very interested in artificial intelligence applications and the legal issues that are raised by them. So I've written 2 books on that topic. One about sort of legal responsibility that arises when AI causes harms, and this most recent one, which will come out actually tomorrow, I think, is on the international governance of artificial intelligence. So those are some of my interests, and we can continue that as we go on in our meeting.
That's super exciting. I didn't know that you had that book coming out. I'm really interested to hear a little bit about the AI space in international governance. That sounds pretty fascinating, especially as lawyers and academics, we've been talking a lot about AI.
It certainly has blown up, hasn't it? Yeah.
Oh
right.
My gosh, no joke. Well, I would love if you could tell us just a little bit about what does it mean when we talk about international law? What does that include?
So international law, particularly when we're talking about how it might relate to compliance, is in actually kind of 2 forms. One is called public international law, and that's the law that regulates the relationships between nation states and international organizations like the United Nations or NATO. And some of that has to do with international business and the kinds of things that, say, compliance officers would be concerned about in their sort of daily activities. The other one, though, the other part of international law, which is much more closely connected to our conversation today, is sometimes it's called private international law, and sometimes it's referred to as transnational law. And that's the law, and that's the law that has a direct impact on mostly business activities. Some of that spills over into public law, like say the World Trade Organization, administers a bunch of international treaties that govern international trade, and the United States is subject to those treaties. And then also at the same time, and this is often where compliance becomes an issue, is that often we're going to be working for companies, organizations that are engaged in business that crosses borders. And as soon as you do that, then there's the strong possibility that the laws of other countries or other regions of the world will apply. And that's another area in which international lawyers spend a lot of time in which they concentrate.
I imagine, and feel free to correct me, but when people ask me kind of what sports law is, because that's kind of my area of research, I'm like, well, it's everything that intersects, sports, right? Anything,
right?
But a myriad of different laws. And it seems similar in that international law is kind of every area of law that you transact across nations. Yeah,
that's right. You're exactly right. So that as soon as we talk about crossing a border, then, and you're right, the current state of international law touches about every aspect of, well, almost every domain of life, to be honest with
Mhm.
you. And that does include business activity. So very much like sports law in that sense.
Sure. So like when we think about corporate law, I'd love to hear more about kind of like what areas of corporate law. It sounds like contracts, real estate, and what sort of things come up for corporate attorneys in that space around international law.
That's a great question. So corporate law itself, right, is an umbrella concept. And so when people go into, say, transactional law, or they become corporate lawyers, for example, what that usually means is that you're helping a company in two major areas. So one is just the basic business deals, sales, leases, all those kinds of things that businesses do to earn income, right, or earn revenue. So that is like negotiating contracts and maybe licenses and setting up joint venture agreements, things like that. And then the other part of corporate law is about actually the rules of law that govern the actual business organization, like a corporation or a limited liability company. And that has a whole bunch of, it's very much corporate law, but it really goes to kind of the structure and the governance of those kinds of entities, like what they can do, how they're organized, what they can't do. So that's another area. And in both of them have international aspects. I think it's more the case when you're talking about the transactions that you mentioned, Kelly, that that's when sort of compliance comes into play. However, this other aspect about how entities are organized, that's also often a part of compliance, particularly when it comes to companies that are selling their securities.
Sure. Yeah.
As you know, there's a ton of regulation related to
Oh, yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So when we talk about a compliance officer, and I
Mhm.
picked this image specifically because we actually have an alum of the program who works in maritime up in Everett,
Oh, great.
and so just north of us. And their role, they started out kind of they kind of grew their career, and contracts manager does not do their role justice, right? But
Right.
I think that's what their title is.
Okay.
But they really kind of work with all of the incoming and outgoing shipments, right? So to and
Mhm.
from the port. And, obviously Seattle and, other areas, New York, San Francisco, et cetera, LA have huge ports, right? There's so much shipping that's going in and out. And so he's using his degree, his MLS, in his contracts management role
That's great.
in working through these transactions, right? These sales and receiving of goods, I assume.
Right.
So I'm curious, what statutes, treaties, or other, cases, et cetera, might a compliance officer be working with in this space?
To be honest, it could be almost anything.
Yeah,
So to describe, for example, the graduate of this program you're describing, um, obviously they are dealing with all of the rules and regulations that go into the actual, carriage of the goods that are being shipped on carriers, for
hmm
example. And that means the kinds of contracts that are used to, safeguard the buyer and seller of those goods, as well as the ship company that is, transporting those goods. And several of those contracts are governed by kind of overarching treaties. So we're talking about international law,
hmm
sets out the parameters for those things which this graduate is now overseeing. And that's just, as it were, the carriage, right, of the goods and the purchase and sale. And then when goods are being brought into the border, obviously then they're subject to customs duties. And that's
Oh,
another
sure.
area, right, of international business
Yeah.
transactions, getting them into the into the country, that is. And that's subject to a number of regulations, which I engage in. And I did some of that work when I was in practice. Um, but all that to say, I could easily see a compliance officer um, having to be concerned, right, to make sure that as these goods are crossing the border, uh, that they're being navigated, right. Well, I'm sorry about the pun, to be used through,
Mhm.
right, all of those regulations.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I've had folks ask me like, well, at what point does a compliance officer or that sort of contract management role
Mhm.
end and the lawyer's work begin?
Right.
And it's so distinct to me. I can appreciate that, like, the lawyers are the folks negotiating the contracts, dealing with that sort of, writing the contracts, et cetera. But
Right.
there really is a space for this kind of legal knowledge when it comes down to, okay, well, that contract, the
Mhm.
agreement, where rubber meets the road, right? So your
Yes.
compliance officer is bringing in, the information from the contract, the treaties, best business practices from other organizations, and trying to like create policies and a framework around
Mhm.
how to implement that, right? So it's a fascinating intersection of skills, I think. And I'm
I agree.
curious. Yeah,
Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
you
No,
please. No. Let me just say before we go, and that's such an
sure.
important question, an area that we should explore further. I
Hmm.
do want to mention just before we move from to that topic
Yeah.
that we were mentioning international shipping, transportation. I also want to just point out that this is really, say, large language models like ChatGPT. That's
I never thought
exploding.
of that. Wow.
It's exploding now because, and that goes to not so much about shipment of goods, et cetera, but it's more about privacy regulations, which apply, particularly if for someone who's in any way engaged or connected with the European Union, because there's stringent privacy regulations there. And folks might be aware that OpenAI, which is the developer of ChatGPT, is the subject of a number of enforcement actions in Europe because they are alleged to, or there are concerns that they're not following those privacy regulations. So, any company here in the United States, again, which touches or has customers, et cetera, in Europe, is going to have to navigate those regulations. And that's exactly what a compliance officer would be
Yeah.
doing at the international level.
I never even thought about that. But I can see the same sort of uh, application in, healthcare privacy, financial
Yes,
privacy,
very much so.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
incredible. Yeah, I
Right.
didn't think about that at all. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, the European Union definitely is pushing the US along in some of those areas.
Yeah, in my view, it's really kind of the de facto regulator of,
Yeah.
say, uh, particularly privacy, digital privacy. And then it's now has some proposed regulations on artificial intelligence applications itself. And unless the United States catches up, again, Europe is going to be the leader. And so that'll be something that compliance officers will have to contend with for the next, say, 10, 15 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also reminded, um, when we think about like the big umbrella of international law, the TikTok, right? So
Yeah.
TikTok's having to justify a lot of stuff going on in the US. And
Mhm.
I mean, this is kind of a question. Is TikTok even like available in the EU? It must be, but if they're
Right.
getting scrutinized here, then I imagine they would be scrutinized there too.
I think they are. I don't know for a fact, but I can't imagine that it's not, right. It'd be hard to believe
Yeah.
that the regulators in Europe are not looking at them carefully. Now, at the same time, the United States' primary concern is, well, it is about privacy of
Mhm.
a users of TikTok here in the United States. It's also the national security concerns,
Sure.
and those are not as much a priority to those in Europe as it is here in the United States. So that's another thing.
Interesting. Yeah. That's an interesting distinction for sure.
Yeah.
Um, what sort of skills, I kind of went ahead on the slide a little bit more, but like,
Mhm.
I think one of the things kind of when we think about, the compliance officer role, the risk management roles, being kind of where the lawyer leaves off and
Mhm.
implementation. And one of our other alums who has worked, their skill set is very much compliance focused. They've worked in pharmaceutical, data privacy, and now
Mhm.
they're in hardware manufacturing compliance. So it's really an interesting trajectory.
Right.
But one of the things that they said to me once is like the compliance officer is like the communications hub. They're talking to kind of everyone,
Mhm.
and really synthesizing all that information. So I'm curious kind of what your take is on that with respect to international compliance and how you see that working in corporations.
I think that's very similar. And the person you're describing is, I think, really accurately describing the role of a compliance officer and the compliance function, as opposed to, say, someone who is purely in the legal department. Because as I understand it, compliance is about ensuring that the organization for which you work is complying, right, with all of the applicable regulations, laws, as well as the internal policies, right, to which that organization is subject. And in order for that to happen, you're this person is quite right that that requires a couple things, right? You have to have, and you need to develop. That's the reason for programs like ours. The kinds of legal skills and analytic skills that just help you understand how a regulation actually is applied, how it's made, how law, right, the overarching law does that, right? So you've got to have that in mind and be trained in how to understand like a statutory or regulatory framework, and then how that might apply to everyday business operations. But so that's a given, right? These
Right.
sort of conceptual and analytic skills, lawyers need those too. I do think that is one difference, though, is it's much more important for compliance officers, as you say, to be able to relate well to everybody in their organization, because essentially they're the ones who are going to be ensuring that on a day-to-day level in all of the business operations of their organization, that again, there's kind of like almost like a climate, right, of compliance.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, and just to go back to privacy again, and also to these proposed regs on artificial intelligence, there's already these really strong requirements because of these statutes and the regulations that there be that kind of function in each organization.
Right.
So it's both required by law, but also I think it's just great practice within an organization.
It's such a fun space for me. Having had a career in business before I became a lawyer,
Right.
I look back, and 20 years ago, we didn't call these folks compliance officers, right? They were just the human resources officer or manager,
Right.
or, and truly it's, there's people who are great at law and legal analysis and they become lawyers. And then there's this really special skill set that's, how do you take that and bring it back into operations? And it's a lot of fun.
That's right. I mean, I've trained and practiced as the lawyer, so I will say that is my orientation. And so I will say, it's a lawyer who, if the company is sued, or if there is like a violation that's pretty clear, then right, that's when the legal function takes over, because about the need to protect the organization, also to maybe navigate through like really complex or
right.
Those kinds of situations, and also to do the things like negotiate contracts and all that kind of stuff. But you're right to say the role of a compliance officer is just much more general, because again, it's working every day with what is going on in an organization every day.
Yeah. I mean, as that communicator, you're dealing with subject matter experts, right? Whether it's in your healthcare space, privacy space.
Yeah.
And the lawyer is one of those subject matter experts that might be informing some of the, either the contracts or the regulations or whatever. But it's really fun. I love the idea when I was in business and then working with our students now, that they get to kind of see, all of those pieces. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, right, exactly. Because you do get this overarching view, right, of the organization, and also you have the mandate, right, as a compliance officer, to sort of get into all of that.
For sure. Yeah. Well, I want to make sure that we have some time for questions. If anybody has any, you're welcome to kind of raise your hand in the webinar, or put it in the chat. I can see about pulling up our Q&A in our chat. Give people a couple minutes. I don't really see any questions. I have our contact information up on the screen. So if you have additional questions about the program, about international law, our other tracks, healthcare, finance, we kind of are starting to like cover the gamut, right? And I think one of the things I love about our program is we don't require students to pick a track, and they can kind of mix and match their courses, so their elective courses are suiting their professional needs. So if anyone has any questions, I will happily hang on the line and answer any questions. But Mark, I really appreciate your help and your support today, especially calling in while you're supporting families. So I hope you get to enjoy some of the weather outside. I'm
Thank you
jealous
so
a
much.
little bit because it's a little chilly in Seattle.
Oh, is it? Is it? Yeah. Okay.
A little. It's not quite summer yet. Yeah, but
I see. Right.
yeah.
Well, thank you for the invitation to join this meeting. And folks, also, my contact information was, I think, up at the front of the slides. And so, if people have questions, feel free to reach out via email, and I'm happy to respond to questions.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're really welcome, Kelly. And have a great summer. And
You
if we're not
too.
in contact sooner. All right.
Yeah,
All right.
that sounds great. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, I am happy to kind of let you all back to your day. Thank you so much for joining us. My contact information again is right here. You're welcome to send me an email, give me a phone call, and we're happy to help you through the process or answer any other questions that you have about our program. Again, my name is Kelli Rodriguez Currie, and I am the Director of Master of Legal Studies program here at Seattle University School of Law. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you all taking the time out, and I hope you have a really good day.